Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Huda Khalid. I've been at TCEQ for about a year. My background is in civil and environmental engineering, and I will be talking to you today about CT studies. But before we begin, I'm going to continue the dad joke tradition and start off with a joke that my coworker Leah told me. Hopefully I don't butcher it. The Earth is 70% water, but that water is not carbonated. So that means the Earth is flat. Okay, to give you all an overview of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to do surface water first and then groundwater. So with surface water, I'll talk about kind of what they are and then when you need one, how to submit one, and then I'll kind of tie it all together and talk about how it goes into your surface water monthly operating report. So a surface water CT study is required for every single treatment plant that uses surface water or groundwater under the influence or a GUI. All of these plants must have an accurate TCEQ approved CT study on file. And the information that we obtain from the CT study is going to be used in your surface water monthly operating reports for surface water systems and GUI systems. So to go back to the basics, what does CT mean? So CT stands for concentration time, and concentration refers to the concentration of disinfectant that you are injecting into your system. And T is the contact time. So how long is that water in contact with the disinfectant? And that's obviously the most important because we want adequate contact time so that the water has time to thoroughly be disinfected. So a CT study, which you submit to us, gauges how well the disinfection process is actually working at the plant. There's sometimes some confusion on when it's required to be submitted, especially when it comes to like new plants and which part of the process do we submit this in. So for new plants, you're going to submit your CT study when it's approximately 90% complete or 3 months out from startup. The other time that a CT study is required is if you have an existing plant, but it's undergoing major renovations and significant changes are being made to the disinfectant process, you're gonna need a CT study. So obviously if you're changing the type of disinfectant that you're putting in or you're changing the physical facilities that increase or decrease the contact time. So you could be adding in some filters or adding in a clear well or removing something, adding piping, whatever it is, it's gonna affect how long your water is in contact with the disinfectant. So you're going to have to submit a revised CT study. Okay, so the process to submit a CT study is pretty simple. And it's actually on our website as well. So if you just Google TCEQ CT studies, it'll bring up a public web page. And it has some great resources on there. There's step-by-step instructions. There's also checklists for both groundwater and surface water CT studies. So if you're not sure where to begin, I would start there. That's a really great resource. And then you can always email or call us. Our email is ptrs@tceq.texas.gov. With your submittal, you're going to include a cover letter with the reason that you need the CT study. Also include your contact information, that's very important. And then you're going to complete the surface water CT template, which if you see the word template in this presentation, it's going to be referring to a spreadsheet basically. And that's gonna be completed according to the CT template instruction manual. And that manual also is on our website. It's really great, it's very thorough. So it has step-by-step instructions, especially when you go into the Excel file, you kind of have to put in all the dimensions of your equipment and your unit processes, like if it's piping or if it's a filter or whatever. It kind of walks you through how do you pick your disinfectant that you're using. Let's say you're using chlorine. How do you select that and how do you input everything that's going in there? So that's a really great resource. So we will communicate with both the operators and engineers to ensure proper locations of your injection and monitoring points. That's really important. So a CT study is, especially a surface water one, is basically built off of these things called disinfection zones. And I'll show you on the next slide a schematic that shows you what you're required to include on those in those disinfection zones. So this is an example of a schematic. It's a pretty simple one, but you can see there's 3 rectangles that show D1, D2, and D3. So a disinfection zone is defined as a zone that begins with an injection or monitoring point, and then it ends with the subsequent injection or monitoring point. For example, on this one, you're injecting chlorine dioxide and then you're monitoring it later on. So that spot in the middle is a disinfection zone. And then again, we're injecting towards the end, and then monitoring, and then again at the end and monitoring. So the things that make up these disinfection zones are whatever's inside that area. So for example, in the last area, it's a clear well. So you would go into your spreadsheet and put that in. You would put in, the dimensions of the clear well, the volume, and the spreadsheet will calculate the flow rate for you, and then it'll tell you the contact time for that clear well. So why do we do all this, and where is it going to go? So once you submit your CT study to us, we will review it, make any necessary modifications, and then we'll approve it. And with your approval letter from us, you'll get a table. So this is table 1. It'll include what your disinfection zone is, what the treatment unit name is, how much the volume is, the flow rate, baffling factor, and then T10 at the very end. So this just tells you, this will be useful just to know, like, okay, here's what we have at the plant and how it's all laid out once we're disinfecting and how it basically comes together. And then a footnote on this table, it just tells you like all the dimensions and comments for the values entered can be found in your T10 section of the CT template. So that means if you're wondering where these numbers came from, like where did we get the volume, where did we get the flow rate, it's all notated in the template. Okay, so the second table that you'll receive in your letter, in your CT letter, this is called disinfection process parameters, and this is actually going to go into your surface water monthly operating report. So this table is very important. It gives you the flow rate through each disinfection zone, and then the contact time, so that's T10 down here, for your treatment plant. And then the two numbers at the end, where it says performance standards log inactivation, that's the crux of a CT study. Normally we want, and y'all are probably familiar with this, but we want 2 log removal for cryptosporidium, we want 3 log removal for Giardia, and 4 log removal for viruses. So that means basically it's 99%, 99.9%, and then 99.99%. So a conventional surface water treatment plant, when the water goes through the typical processes of like rapid mix, coagulation, flocculation, et cetera, you get certain credits. And then whatever credits, meaning you've removed a certain portion of the Giardia or the viruses. Whatever's remaining is at the end of that table. So in this particular example, you have to still remove 0.5 log of Giardia and 2 log of viruses. So that's where we get the numbers at the end. If you have a surface water treatment plant, this probably looks familiar to you. This is the surface water monthly operating report, and that table 2 that was on the last slide goes at the top. So you fill in your flow rates and your contact time. So membrane plants are a little bit different. This whole slide is a lot of text, but basically it's just saying that ever since April 1st, 2012, if you have a membrane and you're installing it or replacing membranes with your treatment, you can only do so after you have done all these specific tests and submitted them to TCEQ. That's about it. Some more information on the requirements for membrane plants are over here. And the last bullet talks about direct integrity testing and the fact that it can be submitted concurrently with the CT study. So again, we get a lot of questions like, if I have to do all these tests, do I submit it with my plan or after, or when do I submit it? So you can submit it at the same time, and we'll review both at the same time. So that concludes our surface water CT study portion of the presentation. And some key takeaways are, just remember that if you have a surface water treatment plant or a GUI system, you have to have an approved CT study on file. And just remember that parameters from your CT study must match the parameters that you put on your SWMOR. We had an example recently of a plant that had a CT study from like 2015, and then they they didn't revise their CT study, but they made some changes to their plant. So they increased the flow rate, they added some equipment in that definitely affected the disinfection, and they went ahead and just put those updated flow rates on their surface water monthly operating reports, but you're not supposed to do that. That'll actually give you a violation. So if you update anything in your surface water plant, make sure that you submit a revised CT study, you get an approval letter back from us with your updated parameters like we talked about. I'll just go back to the slide to show y'all this table. So it's gonna have your flow rate and your T10, and that goes right there. So you don't wanna be doing an SWMOR with changed parameters, because if your records don't match our records for the most recent approved TCEQ CT study, that's gonna be a problem. So we're gonna talk about groundwater now. So groundwater CT studies are also known as 4-log CT studies, and that's again because 4-log basically means 99.99% removal of viruses. So typically for groundwater, you don't need, obviously it's the water's under the ground, so you don't need all the pre-treatment that we do with surface water plants. So that's why you only have to remove the viruses for groundwater CT studies. So generally, they are a bit simpler than surface water CT studies. And these are just the disinfectants listed: chlorine, chlorine dioxide, ozone, or maybe chloramines. Although typically we see chlorine is used the most in groundwater. The groundwater rule does not require disinfection or 4-log inactivation of viruses for all groundwater systems. So this is a big distinction between surface water and groundwater. So if you have a groundwater plant, you don't necessarily have to do a CT study. There are other ways for you to show that your well does not have contamination or viruses that need to be treated. And on that same note, before choosing to provide 4-log inactivation or before doing a groundwater CT study, small systems should exhaust all possible options before installing new technologies. So this includes maybe switching to better quality source water, like choosing another groundwater well to get your water from, considering possibly purchasing water from another system, or you could disinfect the well per AWWA standards. So it all just kind of depends on each system. It's a case-by-case thing, and obviously cost is a big factor as well. So for systems that do end up doing CT studies or groundwater CT studies or 4-log treatment, why do they do it? So the most common reason is the last bullet. So they're often required by TCEQ as a condition to an exception or as corrective action to the groundwater rule. So if they have, for example, positive fecal indicators in their groundwater samples, they're going to have to conduct triggered source monitoring. And a lot of times treatment plants don't want to do that because it's a lot of work, especially if you have a lot of wells. You have to go and monitor, and I think there's like a certain amount of wells in a 24-hour period, and it can be pretty cumbersome. So a lot of systems decide, okay, we don't want to go through with all that. We'd rather just do a groundwater CT study and show that we're disinfecting our water properly. So if there are positive fecal indicators like E. coli or total coliform or anything like that, we're taking care of it with disinfection. And a lot of times, sometimes the CT study is kind of just a formality because the system is already disinfecting their water. So it's almost like you get TCEQ's stamp of approval to keep doing what you're doing. So that's another reason why, and that would be the first bullet. They're already doing it, or they have the capability to provide 4-log inactivation through their existing treatment processes. Okay, so how do you apply for a 4-log CT study? The process is pretty similar to surface water CT studies. You just submit it to ptrs@tceq.texas.gov. Again, we have a checklist on our public website that has all the steps on how to do it, and it's step-by-step. It's very easy to follow, but the basics are you include a cover letter with kind of a description of your process, like this is how many wells we have, this is where we disinfect, et cetera, and then you complete the groundwater template. And on that template, you'll basically show all the sources that are going into that treatment plant. So on the template and the schematic. So you'll show your treatment plant ID, your well ID numbers, your flow rates, injection points, and of course monitoring points. So this is what a groundwater CT study template looks like. It's actually, this is all it is. So it's pretty simple. And you just fill in the yellow cells with the information from your plant. So for example, how many storage tanks do you have? Because the total capacity will go in line 1. What's the volume or the water level, et cetera. And then the template itself will calculate the orange cells. And then at the very bottom, it'll give you a minimum specified residual in milligrams per liter. And that's what you're required to maintain at your plant and in distribution. So this is a pretty simple schematic for a groundwater facility. You would show, this is what we require to see on the schematic with your CT study. You're gonna show your wells and give the flow rate. You're gonna show where you inject, and you're gonna show the storage tank, and then you're eventually gonna show where you monitor, your service pumps, and eventually when it goes out to distribution. So this is what we typically see with a groundwater CT study. So if it's approved, we'll notify you in writing of your approval status, and your letter will include a lot of text that we really do hope you read about what you're required to do to monitor your water properly and make sure that you can maintain that 4-log CT study. Like I mentioned before, that spreadsheet will calculate a minimum specified residual at the bottom. So you have to maintain that at distribution. Sometimes, and this is just kind of a technicality, but sometimes the minimum specified residual may be lower than what we actually require plants to have at distribution. So our minimum, no matter what, is the system must maintain at least 0.2 milligrams per liter of free chlorine or 0.5 milligrams per liter of chloramines in distribution. But sometimes when you fill this in, at the bottom, it'll give you like 0.1. So even if your template tells you 0.1, you still have to maintain a residual of 0.2. Once you get an approved CT study, you have to maintain the minimum specified residual on a daily basis. This includes nights, weekends, and holidays. And this rule requirement is in addition to the groundwater or purchased water monthly operating report, as well as the disinfectant level quarterly operating report. So there's a lot of stuff in here that's going to be specific to groundwater. And if I don't get into it, at least all the rule requirements for groundwater, there's actually a presentation right after this one on the groundwater rule. So just letting you know, because I'm kind of throwing a lot of compliance requirements out there. So if you have questions, just ask or stick around for the next session. Similar to the surface water CT study, if you get a approved groundwater CT study, you'll get a letter. And that letter will include a table. And that table will give you the equipment you have and the contact time. And then obviously the most important number at the end is that 1.81 milligrams per liter of free chlorine. So for this particular public water system, that's the residual that they have to maintain. And of course, we have notes at the bottom to show the operators and everyone at the plant, especially region, in case there's an inspection, like where did we get these numbers from, where was the flow rate coming from, et cetera. And this is just general information on where you sample for chlorine residual. It's going to be after you treat the water and after the storage and before it goes to the first customer. Obviously, the sampling location will vary on a case-by-case basis. And then if your monitoring equipment fails, and you have to take grab samples every 4 hours until you can repair that equipment, and you must repair it within 14 days. Some more monitoring or compliance information we have here is you have to maintain a record of your approval letter on site. So when we send you your CT study approval letter, make sure you keep that with you. You also have to maintain a monthly operating report on site and record residuals daily to be made available upon request. So with surface water CT studies, y'all actually send your monthly operating reports in to us every single month. But with groundwater, you don't actually have to do that. You just keep them on site at your facility in case a regional investigator comes out and wants to see them. And I believe you keep them on your site for up to 10 years. Systems approved for 4-log treatment are not required to conduct triggered source water monitoring. So that means basically what I said before is if you already have a groundwater CT study, then you don't have to go out and sample all your wells all the time to make sure that you're negative for total coliform or E. coli or all of that. Okay, so these are just some more requirements. Systems that serve more than 3,300 people must continuously monitor and record their disinfectant residuals, whereas systems with less than 300 people or 3,300 people only have to monitor once a day. And of course, this will all be included in your letter, your approval letter that you get. So you may have a violation if you fail to meet the performance monitoring or reporting requirements provided to meet the 4-log virus inactivation. That's also if your MSR concentration is not restored within 4 hours. So if you drop below, let's say your minimum specified residual was 0.5 and you drop below that for more than 4 hours, like let's say you get a 0.2 or 0.1, that shows that a potential violation may have occurred. If a system fails to maintain a 4-log treatment of viruses, the system must provide public notification within 30 days of learning of this violation. There's the groundwater monthly operating reports, and there's a section, and if your disinfectant residual is less than your minimum specified residual, it'll highlight it in red for you. So that'll tell you there's something wrong here. So you do need to notify the TCEQ within 30 days. And then you have to conduct compliance monitoring, and you have to provide public notification within 90 days of learning of the violation and provide public notification in your consumer confidence reports at least once a year. So if your residual drops below what it's required to be for more than 4 hours, you have to notify the TCEQ as soon as possible, but no later than 24 hours later. And that's the contact information for the drinking water assessment team, who you would notify if your residual drops at your plant. And if you have any questions on the groundwater rule specifically, this is the drinking water assessment team's contact information. So what does a groundwater system do if they don't want to do 4-log inactivation anymore? So you have to notify us in writing. And basically, since you're no longer disinfecting your water up to a certain standard, you have to conduct triggered source monitoring in the future. So that means going out and sampling your wells for total coliform, E. coli, et cetera. That's one option, or that's an option that's available to some plants. But if the groundwater system is providing 4-log as a condition of an exception, it may not be possible to stop providing this level of treatment while continuing to use that particular well. So again, it's done on a case-by-case basis, and definitely notify us, and we'll be in touch after we evaluate. Sometimes it may be appropriate to discontinue 4-log treatment if, these are kind of best case scenarios, the previous source is replaced by a source that's been shown to be less sensitive hydrogeologically and free from contamination based on monitoring. So if your well somehow monitoring or whatever shows that it's become a little bit cleaner. Or the second condition or example is if you had kind of a damaged well, but you rehabilitated it. So a well with structural conditions resulting in impairment of its water quality is rehabilitated, and those structural impairments no longer exist. So these are record-keeping requirements. In addition to the record-keeping requirements for all drinking water systems, if you have a 4-log CT study, these are the records that you're required to keep. Okay, so the last thing we're gonna discuss is Drinking Water Watch. If you go online, Drinking Water Watch is kind of a public database of all the public water systems in the state of Texas. And so if you put in your PWS ID number, it'll pull up a lot of really great information about your plant and where the source of the water is coming from, whether it's surface or groundwater, the name of the well, even the storage tank IDs, like everything is listed there. So if you want to check what's going on with your plant, this is kind of some instructions on how to do that. You just go online and the website's written down there, and you enter your PWS ID, and then you scroll to water system facilities, click on the facility flows, click on your treatment plant. So you have to click a few things, but eventually you'll find your treatment plant, and it'll tell you next to it, if it's written procedure code 361, that means that it's approved for 4-log treatment. You can also check your minimum specified residual. So after you submit your CT study to us and we send it back to you with your MSR value, if you kind of go through the same steps as before and click on your treatment plant, you can find the approved MSR. So in conclusion, maintaining a 4-log treatment or a CT study, groundwater CT study, does not remove the need to maintain the infrastructure of your system. And don't forget that any treatment upgrades or installations must be approved by TCEQ in advance. And a good rule of thumb to remember in general is if you have a CT study already, anytime your plant has operational changes that affect disinfection, submit an updated CT study to us for review and approval. So that goes for both surface water and groundwater systems. That's really important because if you're adding or removing equipment or making any changes that affect disinfection, it's gonna affect your CT, and we're gonna wanna know that. Okay, so the way that you submit a CT study to us for review is you have two options. One is by email at the email address above. The other is by mail, and that's our address there. Okay, and if you have any questions, obviously I'm here to answer them. A few other people from our team are here to answer them as well. That's our phone number, that's our email, and then this is the team of people who works on CT studies at TCEQ.
So the first one is, what impact do water quality parameters, for example, pH, turbidity, have on the effectiveness of 4-log inactivation?
Oh, that's a good question. They actually have a really huge effect. So generally when we do CT studies, we analyze it for worst case scenario. So that would be it would be the highest pH. So chlorine or disinfectants in general are more effective at more acidic pHs. So we put in higher pHs just to make sure that even at worst case scenario, if your water is super basic for some reason, you're still gonna be chlorinating effectively. What were the other parameters? Flow rate is one of them too. So the faster your flow, the less contact time you have between your disinfectant and your water. So that's also gonna kind of be a worst case scenario. So the higher your flow, the less contact time you have, the harder it's gonna be for you to disinfect your water. There was pH, there was flow rate. Temperature. Okay. Yeah, disinfection works better at warmer temperatures because chemical reactions happen faster at warmer temperatures. And also, this is interesting, but the viruses and Giardia that we're trying to inactivate through disinfection are actually, they go dormant at lower temperatures. So they won't get killed at lower temperatures either. So the warmer your water is, the more likely your disinfection is to be effective.
Are there specific types of viruses that are more resistant to 4-log inactivation?
Yes, there are. I do not know them off the top of my head, but I do know that there are some pathogens that, traditional chlorination or disinfection doesn't remove. And so you would have subsequent treatment after that to make sure those are taken care of. And I think that would only be caught through sampling. We'd have to kind of determine on a case-by-case basis what needs to be done to take care of those viruses.
This is the last one from the virtual audience. Do we need to issue BWN if we have inadequate residual after use 4-log treatment?
No. So if my understanding is correct, and TCQ people correct me if I'm wrong, if you have a hit for total coliform or E. coli or anything like that, you need to do repeat sampling. And then if it comes back again as positive, then you would have to go through the process of a boil water notice.
Aren't meeting the CT that you would need to issue the boil water notice?
I don't think that's, as far as I know, they have to notify TCEQ first because boil water notices kind of cause a lot of public hysteria. So I think we want to prevent that. So the first step is to contact TCEQ and figure out, let's do repeat sampling or let's do something really quickly and make sure that this is actually an issue.
Yeah, but if they're not meeting CT, that's not necessarily related to sampling. It's just related to a malfunction in the chlorination equipment, more than likely, if it's like a groundwater system.
Okay.
So that's been my understanding. I've had a surface water system that didn't meet CT, and they were told to issue a boil water notice until they could prove that they can meet CT. So that's just by experience when that's come up, but I do agree probably contacting Water Supply Division and confirming that.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea.
Our team comes at this from the technical standpoint, and this is a compliance question. So we are artfully dodging this and saying that that's more a question for compliance people who are more familiar with those procedures.
So we have inactivation ratios every 8 hours, according to our permit. So 6 a.m., 2 p.m., and 10 p.m. The plant had an issue where it shut down at 12 a.m. in the morning, and the plant was off the entire 24 hours due to a storm. And then we got a violation for our inactivation ratio that day. And if it's every 4 hours, I would think that the 10 o'clock the day before would work. Does that make sense?
Well,
every 4 hours,
when was it shut down?
It was shut down at midnight. So there was, and then there's no way to get an inactivation ratio that day. So 2 hours before that, we had one, and it was good. And then when plant came back on, it was good. So we received a violation for that. Is that?
Yeah, again, that's more of a compliance issue.
Oh, okay.
We deal with the technical aspects of CT studies, but so you got a violation from TCEQ.
Yes.
So that's knowledge for me and that's learning for me because that's good to know that if you're going to shut down your plant and you're not going to meet your inactivation, even if it's shut down, then that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, it was kind of strange that we got one, but I'm talking to the team about it. I had another question too, though. So we had an investigation for brown water, and we realized we had a lot of manganese and iron that was causing brown water. So we're going through, we submitted a new CT that had sodium permanganate injected. The regional office said that we had to do a CT. Our engineers fought it, and they're like, you don't have to do a CT for sodium permanganate. So I was a little confused about that one. Is our regional office a little off, or is our engineers off?
That's a good question.
Because it's not really disinfection.
Yeah.
Right?
Correct. So we don't consider permanganate a disinfectant for CT purposes.
Really?
Yeah.
So how would we go about injecting? Just let TCQ know, hey, we got an injection point here, and we're going to start injecting?
Yeah. What exactly did they tell you when you switched over to that?
They said that we needed to submit a new CT study that showed our injection points for sodium permanganate to get off the violation.
Okay. Yeah. So that's interesting to me because as far as I know, or like I mentioned, for CT purposes, we don't consider permanganate a disinfectant.
Right. Yeah. That's what we were wondering. We're like, why do we have to submit one of these for
Yeah.
sodium permanganate?
Yeah. I'm a little confused on that. I think CW has something to say.
So if you were to submit any injection points other than the disinfectants that we look at in the CT study, the first thing we do is tell you to remove those injection points from your schematic. So like any alum, sodium permanganate and all that, we try to take all those off the schematics just to avoid confusion. So the only thing that we want to look at is the actual disinfectants. The region may have been wrong on that one.
So we had a couple of groundwater wells for transient non-community systems that were required to do CT studies as part of exceptions for, I don't know, it was probably pressure cementing or something like that. Several years after they've been in operation. And we went to do this one pager deal, but you can't change the baffle factor at all. It's stuck at 0.1, and we were told if we wanted to change it, we needed to do the surface water form, which is, it seems like quite a bit of overkill for what we're actually doing. Is that still the case? We have another one that might be in the same situation coming up. We're kind of just trying to anticipate that.
Did you have multiple tanks?
No, it's just one.
And it was just one with a baffling factor?
Uh-huh.
I know that if there's multiple tanks in series at a groundwater plant, then we do process that as a surface water plant. But this is the first time I'm hearing that if one tank at a groundwater system has baffling factors, then it was pushed back or kicked back to you and said you have to do a surface water.
Yeah, and so we wound up specifying a different tank just so as to not have to do the surface water.
Yeah, that's interesting. CW, have you heard anything like that?
We had a system that we were doing they hired us to do the CT study. Groundwater system, it was for a winery, so it's ground storage tank, pumps, pressure. And we had found a baffled tank that we thought would work well for them, but the baffling factor was I don't know, 0.3 or something. And the one page, groundwater, you can't change the right, which seemed like overkill. Yeah, so my question really was just, is that still the case? Yes, okay. The other question is, when you have a CT study for these small non-transient or transient non-community systems, operationally it becomes a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. Are there any sort of rules-based approaches for making that less onerous on somebody that, a business that's not open but maybe 4 days a week?
I mean, all I really have to say to that is if somebody at TCQ has told you that you have to do one, then it must be for some reason. There's either the well isn't clean or there's for some reason you're not getting clean water out of that well.
Yeah, I mean, we pushed back pretty hard on the one because it was like 3 total coliform positive samples over the course of 4 years. That's what, you might be a gooey well. It's kind of like, all right, well, this is a winery. It's, it went from being an issue to an enormous issue for them.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I know sometimes it's not fun staying in compliance and there's a lot of pushback we get.
Yeah.
But go ahead, Eric.
Again, not to dodge too much, but that particular issue is more a question for, it sounds like that's the requirement for 4-log would have come from an exception, like exception conditions. Yeah, in that case, that's a question for the technical review and oversight team to review the conditions of the granted exception. And again, we're specifically looking at the disinfection protocol itself. The larger issues surrounding that would be based on where the requirement came from. So in this case, you can absolutely reach out to Trot. We can talk after, and I can set you up with Trot to request a review of the granted exception, because every exception can be reviewed. They can take a look at that, and within the framework of their procedures, can see if that burden can be mitigated.
Well, thank y'all for attending, and we're here if you have any other further comments or questions.